to another cross-border talk, which is dedicated to EU enlargement, the renewed push of EU institutions for enlargement in Western Balkans, and reform of European institutions. We'll be talking to Mariya Simeonova, who is coordinator of the European Council on Foreign Relations at Sofia for the Western Balkans. And my first question, and I guess everyone is interested in that, what is realistic with regards to enlargement of the EU? We know that for a long time there was this discussion of enlargement fatigue. There were various disenchantments in Western Europe with some of the latest members of the European Union, and the difficulty to reform and absorb what has been already integrated into it. And now there is a renewed push. How realistic is it to join countries of Western Balkans who have so much conflicts with one another, social issues, and some of them have even issues with neighboring EU countries?
Hello, Vladimir, and thank you for having me at your cross-border talk. It's a pleasure for me to be talking to you about this very important topic. This is a very timely discussion, given that enlargement is one of the most discussed topics right now in Europe because of many factors that we will discuss. First of all, I'd like to start with the fact that enlargement is the most successful foreign policy tool of the European Union, and this is not only something written in the EU books. This is something that has been that especially we witnessed during the years, especially Bulgaria and Romania, who joined the EU in 2007. This enlargement to Central and Eastern Europe after the fall of communism is the embodiment of the success of the EU enlargement. And talking about how realistic it is, I would say it depends on who you ask. I am sure that for our countries, for Bulgaria and Romania, but also for Central European countries, if you ask them 10 years before them joining the EU how realistic it was, I think that there was a high degree of positivism in this direction. But if you now ask the societies of the countries from the Western Balkans, the 6 Western Balkan countries, I'm not sure that they will be so optimistic and positive about EU enlargement. And why this is so? Because those 6 countries have been for years conducting reforms in terms of getting closer to the EU, to the EU acquis, and they've been through many turbulent years of changes in the EU enlargement methodology, including some of the countries experienced the veto power of the EU member states, and here I'm talking about North Macedonia, which was vetoed for more than 25 years from Greece, only to be vetoed by Bulgaria just a couple of years ago. There were other bilateral issues in the region as well, but all these obstacles. Here I'd like to mention also the French veto from 2018 to Macedonia and Albania, who are kind of who go in a package in their EU path. So all these obstacles kind of led to certain loss of credibility of the EU in the region of the Western Balkans. And this was the situation before the war in Ukraine started. With Russia's war in Ukraine, experts, officials, policymakers started talking about what you mentioned, the reinvigoration of the EU enlargement. And Russia's aggression in Ukraine led to EU leaders thinking differently about enlargement. It was clear that enlargement was stuck, but the war, it kind of led them to rethink why it is important to transform the countries from EU's neighborhood, and why it is important to have democratic countries in our neighborhood, but also to reconfirm that uh, those societies are ready to accept the EU values and the EU principles, and the EU standards for the quality of democracy and the rule of law. So this is why since February 2022 we've been in this very dynamic conversation about how to prepare the EU for the next phase of enlargement. So here there are two main questions. First, that enlargement is a geostrategic necessity. We have to make sure that the six Western Balkan countries, together with Ukraine, Moldova, and possibly Georgia, will be part of the EU one day. And this is valid not only for what I mentioned for transforming those societies, but it's also valid for guaranteeing Europe's security. So it is in EU's geostrategic interests to make those countries full-fledged members, and this will make the EU stronger itself. The other important question here is the preparation of the EU itself for this next round of enlargement. And here we have to touch upon the question on whether a reform will be needed within the EU in order to make sure that that it has the absorption capacity to enlarge to those countries. And the two questions are interrelated, interdependent, I would say, and it is important that they already started. So last month, there was this report, Franco-German report on the EU reform, published and supported by France and Germany. So 12 independent experts basically in 9 months gathered and developed their ideas on how the EU should reform in order to prepare for enlargement. I think that we should all be following those conversations, because if we're talking about what's realistic, the first step to make enlargement realistic is to start the ball rolling, and this is to start the tough conversations. First, say it out loud that the Western Balkan countries will be part of the EU, and not just say it, but make symbolic gestures to show that you're committed to this. Because if we go back to 2003 in the Thessaloniki summit, there the EU said the Western Balkan countries that they will be full-fledged members of the EU, but we are now 20 years after the summit and we are having the same conversation. So basically, this new geopolitical momentum has to be used wisely by the EU leaders, but also by the leaders of the Western Balkan countries in order to make their case to the EU. And then the EU leaders should also make those some symbolic gestures to show that this time it is different and that we are fully committed, not just to um, talk the talk, but to walk the walk, if I can allow myself to use this phrase. Um, and I think that we are having the right conversation. We are in a moment of gathering ideas, be it from the leaders of the major EU countries. And here I'm talking about President Macron, for example, who started this conversation and kind of he took a U-turn in the French policy, in the French position towards enlargement from a skeptical country, relatively skeptical country, to the member state pushing for enlargement. We are in a process of gathering ideas also from our community, think tanks, non-governmental organizations, because these are the organizations, the institutes that have been working on the topic for many years and can provide the solid base and comprehensive analysis of what's doable, of what's possible, what is expected from the EU citizens, but also from the citizens of the candidate countries, of the aspiring countries. So this is why I'm saying that we are in a very vital moment, and it will be up for the the policymakers, the officials, to, how should I say, navigate through the ideas which are on the table, show political will, and deliver on their promises. By the way, I'd like to mention here that there was very strong political messaging coming from the EU institutions, namely the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, during her State of the Union address, but also from the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, who set 2030 as a target date for the EU to enlarge. He did that recently at the forum in Bled. So I would like to be optimistic about, I am optimistic about this conversation. And I really hope that in the next months, because the next months will be really important for the EU enlargement. In 2 days, there will be an informal European Council summit in Spain. There will be a formal European Council in December, where some experts expect that Ukraine will start accession talks with the EU. So we'll be following closely the developments in the next 3 months, even less, because they will certainly show what the EU leaders have picked as an idea and how committed they are on delivering on their promises to the countries from the Western Balkans, but also Ukraine and Moldova.
Okay, in parallel to the EU enlargement track, there is this renewed push towards reform of European institutions, and it is a complex issue. It has been discussed many times, but nothing has been happening so far until recently, and it is maybe because this reform means that the weaker countries or the smaller countries will have to abandon their right to veto. And I guess that is an issue which create some tension. So, what do you think will happen regarding the EU reform? How far will it reach?
So this is, as I said, the second important question which should be tackled when we talk about EU enlargement and how to prepare the EU itself for the next phase of enlargement. And more specifically talking, as Ukraine is now a candidate country and inevitably it is part of the conversation, and we should be addressing the question of Ukraine's and Moldova's accession together with the one of the Western Balkans. Ukraine is a big country and a country that is kind of right now, you know, uh, in a war. It requires huge funds for its reconstruction first. And when we talk about how to reform the EU in order to prepare it for enlargement, we should inevitably take into consideration the funds that will be needed for Ukraine and for Ukraine's reconstruction. And here the conversation goes to the next multi-annual financial framework of the EU for the next cycle, but also the common agricultural policy and the cohesion policy. We know that the common agricultural policy absorbs a lot of funding from the EU budget, and Ukraine being predominantly an agricultural country, would absorb relatively big funding from CAP. So I think this is the inevitable conversation on how to prepare those EU policies that will have to go through big changes because of the potential enlarging to the Western Balkans and to Ukraine and Moldova. And here again, I think that by the end of the year, the EU leaders must have clarity on how this will be reflected in the next multi-annual financial framework, but also to start the conversation, and this will be a very difficult conversation on how to reform the cohesion policy and the common agricultural policy. Talking about veto and QMV, the qualified majority voting, yes, this is a very sensitive issue. Some countries, including Bulgaria, have already expressed their concerns about extending the QMV to common foreign and security policy of the EU. It is important to mention here that in the beginning of her mandate, Ursula von der Leyen underscored the necessity to extend QMV to foreign policy. Yes, this is difficult conversation because some member states would see it, as a violation of their sovereignty. But it is true that we often see how unanimity can abstract, important decisions, and specifically taking important decisions very quickly. We know what the veto means in terms of enlargement. Greece was blocking North Macedonia. Bulgaria was blocking North Macedonia. So one member state can put the brakes on enlargement at any moment. But we also saw how Hungary how Viktor Orban was using the veto powers in order to, threaten the EU, not to proceed with the sanctions packages that were adopted in terms related to Russia's aggression in Ukraine against the Kremlin. So this is where the frustration comes from. One single member state, for its own very often narrow national interests, national political interests, can prevent some important decisions taken in Brussels. And here there is also, my expectations, my personal expectations are that the QMV versus unanimity question will not be addressed in the near future. The conversation can start, but I think this will be very difficult and sensitive question, and it will require more talks with each member state. But there is also the other aspect of, bringing what we often hear, bringing another Orban in the EU with bringing Western Balkan countries in the EU, and here, experts often make the comparison between Orban and Vucic. So there is also the fear among the EU member states that potential new members of the EU can further complicate the decision-making process within the EU, because they will also be given, the right to veto important decisions. And of course, here the expert community offers innovative approaches, like, for example, in this staged accession concept, of a gradual integration. There is this idea that the new member states will not be able to block decisions in the first years, and so on and so forth. These are very technical decisions, but I think the main thing to keep in mind here is that the member states themselves will be reluctant to address the QMV question, but who knows if we witness enlargement of the EU to 8 new countries, this will inevitably change the conversation on the QMV versus unanimity as well.
Foreign ministers of Bulgaria and Romania are closely linked to European institutions, and maybe that means that they will have some greater role to play in these two issues of EU enlargement and EU reform.
Yes, this is a great question. Yes, the new foreign minister of Bulgaria, Mariya Gabriel, is a former EU commissioner, but it is not just the foreign minister that represents the pro-European line in politics. It is right now the whole government in Bulgaria, which is trying to uphold the pro-European stance of the country, and this was the result of 5 general elections, and the country went to 2 very turbulent years. Until now, from the formation of the new government in Sofia, we witnessed that Bulgaria is indeed committed to following, to being credible EU member state. and is constantly reconfirming its support to Ukraine. But when we talk about enlargement, it is also important to mention that Bulgaria was the member state blocking the start of accession talks of North Macedonia. And uh, apart from, I'm distancing myself here from the official position of Bulgaria. I'm talking here about the echoing of this in Brussels. Uh, it was difficult for some member states and new capitals to understand fully uh, the rationale behind Sofia's decision to block Macedonia on its path to EU integration. But uh, I think that right now, with the lifting of the veto, Bulgaria once again, and having a pro-European government, Bulgaria once again has a chance to prove itself as the champion for the EU enlargement of the Western Balkans. By the way, that was how uh, Bulgaria was perceived in Europe, um, because it has always been strong supporter um, of, of of the Western Balkans joining the EU, and it showed it very clearly during its first presidency of the Council of the EU, where Sofia puts the Western Balkans integration, EU integration, in the top of its agenda. Uh, I think that Bulgaria should benefit, and Bulgarian policymakers should benefit from this long-term support, should benefit from even from its geographical proximity to the region of the Western Balkans, historical and cultural closeness. I think Bulgaria's foreign policy towards the Western Balkans should benefit from every possible, societal and economic aspects of this closeness that we share with the region, and kind of use it in order to once again be one of the greatest supporters of the EU integration of the region. This is what I'd like to see, and I hope it will happen. And I hope that the Bulgarian policymakers are closely following those dynamic debates on EU enlargement, because there are many, many ideas flowing around, and many, kind of meaningful ideas that should be pursued.
If Bulgaria should play a more active role, what concretely would you advise it to play in both EU enlargement and EU reform?
Well, exactly. I meant that it should be actively participating in the conversations in Brussels, but not only, also on bilateral level. Bulgaria should be talking to other member states, in order to know where things are going, which ideas are being strongly supported. Uh, it should kind of offer, uh, it should contribute by its knowledge on the region, if I can put it that way. Uh, I really think that when talking about the Western Balkans specifically, many member states would be watching Bulgaria as a source of knowledge and expertise on the region. Um, so this is, in practical terms, what I think should happen to have a realization, um, to have a realization about this.